Hi, I'm Christopher Clark, publisher of NACD Directorship magazine, and this is BoardVision. I'm joined today by Edward Knight, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of NASDAQ OMX.
Well, it's great to be here, Chris.
I think to focus our conversation today, obviously NASDAQ petitioned the SEC in October in regards to proxy firms and transparency. And I think that will dovetail perfectly into some of the challenges and why some public company directors feel barraged.
Sure, but let me take a step back and some of the context behind our petition. First of all, you have to understand how passionate NASDAQ is about the public markets. We operate 27 markets around the world. We supply technology to another 80 stock exchanges around the world. It's really in our DNA to support the public markets. Until 2013, the number of public companies on NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange for the last 10 years had been dropping. Only last year did we suddenly have an uptick.
And prior, was that based on the increased regulations here or other factors?
I think the reason it went up, frankly, were market conditions. As you know, 2013, in terms of the performance of the cash equities market, was quite extraordinary. And so it was a good opportunity to raise capital. And so we saw the number of listed companies on NASDAQ go approximately from 2,600 to 2,700. But that, as I said, was the first time in a number of years. So we ask ourselves, what is the cause of this? And talk to listed companies, talk to large investors. We want to protect investors. That's part of a key part of our mission. We think transparent markets that are well regulated protect investors. I'm the Chief Regulatory Officer of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. That responsibility is very important to me. But the more we talk to public companies, the more we realize in today's complex business world, where most companies are global in reach, they have a lot to do. They have a lot of different forces pulling on them. They have to stay focused. They have to look at the best allocation of capital and of their time. And many of the regulations and restrictions that are well-meaning are outdated. And in particular, what we have found is there's a tendency to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. That's something we've tried not to do at NASDAQ, and our listing rules are tailored so that small early-stage companies, that there are some exemptions and flexibility. But many of these rules were not flexible.
I think the one we're talking about in particular has been 10 to 12 years as is, right?
Right. Well, the advent of proxy advisory firms we think is a good development. You need institutional investors should have the right to receive advice from wherever they want. The proxy advisory firms serve a useful purpose. Our issue was the way they came up with their rules. That it wasn't transparent and it wasn't subject to extensive public comment. Let me contrast it with our listing rules. When we change our listing rules, we recently promulgated rules with regard to compensation committees and their composition. That was through a process. First, we have a listing council that advises our board, made up of experts, former CEOs, lawyers, financial experts, to advise the board on listing standards. So they develop those standards, we write them up, and we submit them to the SEC. The SEC publishes them, the public comments on them, and most importantly, those comments have to be weighed carefully in the final product that we promulgate and the SEC approves. If we don't take full account of those comments in the final rule, it is not approved. So we think that conflict needs to be examined. We think the process needs to be examined. Again, we're not against proxy advisory firms, but we think the model can evolve to a more modern model that reflects some of the burdens on public companies today and gives them a real voice in those rules.
Thanks very much, Ed.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you for having me.
On behalf of NACD and NASDAQ, I'm Chris Clark, and this is BoardVision.